There you go. So this is me, Divya, recording for the Journey Project with Mr. Vinod Chopra ji, and he's here to tell us his journey. So, hello Vinod ji, how are
Hi,
you?
how are you? Okay, fine. Where would you like to start?
As they say, let's start from the beginning.
From the beginning. Well, I
Yes.
was actually born in Delhi, New Delhi. Old Delhi, should I say, Kamalnagar. And that was back in 1960, and January 1960. So from there, when I was about 2, my grandparents retired, and everybody moved to Jalandhar, which is another major city in Punjab. We're all from Punjabi origin originally, although my mother was born on what is now the Pakistan side of the border. My father was born in Punjab itself, and really it's from Jalandhar. I was there from age 2 till about age 6, and really growing up there was just very, very pleasurable childhood. I can remember aunties everywhere, there's people everywhere. We did have like a first school, so we did learn ABCD, wanted to do accounting, a bit of English, how to speak and so on. So I had the sort of fundamentals of English, not fluent English obviously, because no one else is speaking it around there. But pick up Hindi and Punjabi, of course. You used to speak Punjabi at home, and most people spoke Hindi there. So my father actually was a professional photographer, and he had a partner where they set up a new business in East Africa in Dar es Salaam. So he actually went to Dar es Salaam back in '64, and that didn't really pan out very well. He stayed there about 8 to 10 months before he was talking to his cousin, which is my uncle. It was actually his Chacha's son, so he's his first cousin, and he was talking to him, and they were in England at the time. So he then decided they would come and visit him here in England. So he actually came over to see my uncle here, and he happened to be in Southampton. He'd come directly from a ship, I believe. He used to work on a ship, and he'd settled in Southampton for the last 3-4 years. When Dad came. And in those days, I think from what my father told me, you were allowed a maximum of £10 to bring in exchange, and even that was a massive amount. He came here with about £2 in his pocket. So literally, and those days planes would come down, it would be just landed, and that's it. You stamp your passport, landed, and that would be it. So he was picked up by my uncle up at Heathrow, and obviously came down here. Felt it was fairly easy to get a job here compared to India and to other countries, and maybe life would be better off for the family here. So he worked a couple of years here, and my mother and myself came over to Southampton in 1966. And there were very few Asian families around in those days. I mean, we literally knew everybody around that time. A lot of the people in Southampton, a lot of people in Southampton knew my dad, the older people, because at that, really there's been an influx into Southampton recently in the last 10 years. But before that, it was a fairly stable and a very communicative Asian population, mainly from Pakistan, from India, and the Indian population was mainly from Punjab. The Pakistani population tend to be Pashtun or Mirpuri or Punjab. There's sort of 3 from there. And it was we had friends within the different communities, Sikh friends, Muslim friends. There was no, in those days, because there were so few of us, there was no difference, and everybody went to everybody's house, and there was literally, it was like it would have been in India, I suppose, at that time. And I then started we actually arrived here and we rented a place in Portswood, which was Shakespeare Avenue, from Mr. Khan at that time, Mr. Shimshad Khan, who unfortunately passed away just a couple of years ago. Just about a year after my father passed away. So they were very, very good friends. So we stayed in his house for the first year or so, and I started school in St. Denis, St. Denis First School, infant school at that time. And that was really when the first culture shock really came in, because up to that point, everything was normal, and there wasn't anything abnormal about it. All right, the shops were different from India, this was different, the streets were different, and at that age, when you're 5, 6, you don't really notice that much. That you can see things are different, but no one ever said anything or did anything. But when we got to school, it was slightly different, and the kids were really not used to seeing either Asians or black kids there. And I think there was only one black guy there, Mark, I remember, and a couple of Indian and Pakistani guys, And really, I did get a lot of abuse at school, I'm afraid, in the first years. And as some bullying goes on, and it really does put your education down as well, because you're in that sort of situation where school is not a constant, and that was my first real experience I can remember of England, unfortunately. After that, we bought a house in Tennyson Road, which is literally just around the block, and that was 26 Tennyson Road, and that was a 4-bedroom house, and really was just a family house, and we lived downstairs, and the upstairs was sort of let, as far as I can remember, because housing in those days, even on a normal working salary, were very expensive, just like now, I suppose. And when people are starting the housing ladder, they would tend to let to get an income. It's a very typical sort of thing. And it later progressed while we were in Tunson Road, because my grandmother and my dad's younger brother were still in Jalandhar. They joined us later on, about 68, 69. And then the house was all ours, we used all the rooms ourselves, and then there was no more tenants, and except for a friend of ours who lived with us as well. And I then progressed through that to secondary school. That's going on to 71. I always remember when I first came to Southampton, because that was 1966, and my birthday is in January, and then 1967 was the first moon landing. So it's a very clear reference in my brain to when we came and what happened and what was here and what the food was like and what things were like here. Very hard to get hold of Indian foods. It tended to be everybody grouping together and driving up to London and getting wholesale, or there were a couple of shops. The original shop down here, it's 2 or 3 people who had shops here. There was a Punjabi shop, which was Mr. Harnam Singh, and then there was Suresh Khan, which is Lala, which later became international store. But before him, there was Bashir Ahmed, I think, who had the corner of Argyle Road. So there was a couple of shops where you could get, and we would buy sort of smaller amounts from there. But the most of the Indian shopping would be done on maybe a couple of monthly basis, and drive up to London to Southall and do the shopping there. I'm losing a little bit of track.
That's
I
all right.
think.
That's all right. It happens. You going down
Yeah,
the memory lane. So
yeah,
let's go
from
back a little bit further.
yeah,
Before we talk more about Southampton, I would like to know a bit more about your days in India,
yeah,
the early days. So you said you were 6 when you left,
yes.
and you definitely left some family there. As you said, your younger
Yeah,
brother was still
not
there.
my younger brother, my dad's younger brother.
Dad's younger brother was.
Yeah.
So what was the family's reaction like, knowing that you guys are like now taking a decision to move
To move,
away?
yeah, obviously they were a little bit upset to see us go. Obviously, my grandmother, especially because I'd grown up with her, and she was obviously very emotional about that. And the idea was originally that my grandmother would join us here later, but you had to get established here to be able to do that. You know, you can't just support someone and bring them over here and all the rest. And even the flights in those days were very, very expensive. I think my father, when he was working back at Tenstrom, he had a job temporarily at Wellworthy's, which was over at the other. So he would cycle all the way out there and cycle it back every day from Southampton out to sort of Tottenham and down. And I think the night shift rates then was like £14 a week. So, and when you've got a £200-300 airfare, it's still a lot of money even in those days. I mean, airfares are one of the things that noticeably come down, although they still seem to be a lot nowadays and they're going up. But compared to what the salaries were in those days, they were 100-200 times their salary. Yeah, sort of. It's one of those things.
And you came by ship journey.
No, we came by air.
Your father came by ship.
No, my father came by air as well.
Okay.
My uncle came by ship.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
working on the ship and he came here to
Okay.
Southampton
Yes. Yeah.
before that. My father came from Dar es Salaam
Okay.
to London, and we came directly from Delhi. I believe the plane stopped in some places. I can't really remember the stops in those days.
Was that your first journey in a plane?
Yes, that was my first journey in a plane, and I think the plane was one of those old Britannia's propeller jobs. I mean, they were fairly big, but I think about 120 passengers or whatever. I can remember that because I would keep that record and I would look up what the plane was and all the rest of it. And I know we stopped on the way through, but I couldn't remember where it was in those days. I mean, there was literally from India all the way across. There was the British flags everywhere in just about all the countries those days. So, and there were air bases they used. So, but coming here, the journey it wasn't hard. It was easy. It was fine. India, I'd grown up. My grandfather was originally the station master at the old Delhi railway station, and their sort of area covered all the way up to what they call Nizamuddin and old Delhi, and the trains would go all the way up to Rawalpindi from one side and through and across UP the other side. So he had a fairly good job, and the housing was all done by the railway in those days. So where I was born was actually railway quarters, if you like, for the managers or whatever. And then when we went to Jalandhar, we had our own house, and it was you would class what you call it, 3-bedroom, I suppose, or whatever. And we had, I mean, it wasn't exactly run down or an old shack or anything. It was like a modern house. You know, you had bathrooms, you had everything else. It's just a normal house because my grandfather had a decent job and he'd built up over the years. And as I say, my father flew then from Dar es Salaam to Southampton. He decided to settle in Southampton, but he couldn't carry on with his profession, which was photography at the time. There just wasn't enough jobs around, and he literally had to take a factory job, which was well paying enough. And that's what he did at the time. Later on, he became self-employed again, but initially he was working. I think he worked at Wellworthy's, he worked at Pirelli's, and another one in between, which I can't remember in between that. But worked Pirelli's quite a long time. My uncle, when he came, worked at Pirelli's. He was an electrician by trade, and when he came here, it was fairly easy to get a job. and then he eventually, I think after a year or two, went to Pirelli's. I think he went to because he wanted to work as an electrician. He went to Gillette, which was in Reading at that time. So he went to work for them first, and then with further experience, when he came back to Southampton, he went to Pirelli's, and he was there 30 odd years, 35 years, something like that. So he was there a long time. Dad, as I say, he carried on working until about 78, 79, when he opened a shop, which was a food takeaway, which is another traditional sort of Asian thing at the time. And there were very few, well, there were no Punjabi shops, and there were no sort of kebab shops at those times where you had the doner kebab and this sort of thing. And he first introduced it up at Burgess Road, and it was actually called Vinod's Kebabs, because they couldn't pronounce my name properly, especially with the English schools. Instead of saying Vinod, they could only say Vino, and that's what you would get. So he actually called it Vinod's Kebabs, and that was the first shop he had. I went, say, from St Denis to Hampton Park, which at the time was a little bit of a notorious school as well. I mean, Hampton Park, Glen Eyre, they weren't the top schools, but okay, that's fine. We did GCSEs or CSEs or whatever it was that time. I didn't get grade ones or anything because the way I'd come through the system, I think, inhibited me a lot because of the bullying and sort of coming through the first school, trying to learn the English, and you just couldn't do it because even in the classroom you get bothered. And then through secondary school, it was when I was about 11, 12, one day I just got so fed up, I just hit this guy so hard it knocked his teeth out. And we were sent home for the day, both of us, but after that I didn't get as much trouble at all. You sort of, the type of environment it was, you either stood up and fought or you got bullied, and that was it.
Yeah. So you said about the cultural shock initially you get at St. Denis. So that was quite a young age. How did you take it at that point of time? I know when in the secondary school you just told me.
Yeah, I mean...
But what was it like in your early years?
There were two lives. There was a home life and an outside life. We didn't sort of mix them. When we went home, we were just normal kids and everything was normal. And when we were outside, I mean, I didn't go home and say to Dad, this is happening, or, there's a problem here. They weren't aware of what was happening because we never mentioned it in those days. So we had to take care of ourselves. And it wasn't just me. There was a lot of other kids like that as well.
So did you, other kids, and you used to talk amongst each other at least about it?
Some of us, yeah. When we went to secondary school, there were more Asian kids. And it wasn't until the second year in the SA when I got, there's a couple more kids joined. It was actually a couple of my Pakistani friends, and we became good friends. And literally after that, after I hit this guy, it then became a lot more easier, and that helped because that meant you could study a bit better and you went up a couple of grades. And they were streamed in those days, these schools and everything. So the streams did go up a bit, but it was very hard to get.
So was this person, did he push the limits on that particular day, or was he being a consistent?
It's been a consistent thing, and he just drove it to the edge one day, and you tend to flip, and I don't think he expected that. So it just got to a stage where you had more friends as well, because as I say, as a secondary school, you start getting more friends. You could start getting to that age. And then, of course, you're changing as well, and then it becomes, who does this guy think he is? And that's how it started from there.
So did this happen in a classroom or a playground?
Everywhere. You would get, from the junior schools, you would be sitting in the classroom, you get flicked from the back, you get pulled, they'd do stupid things. It was constant, and obviously...
And did any of the faculties, teachers knew about that this is happening?
Sometimes, yeah. When you had people in the playground doing it, they would see someone, they would come and break it up, and they would tell them, and they would even report them. The teachers, I mean, the amount of kids in each school, is very limited to what the teachers can do anyway. And you can't stop the kids once they're walking home for a start. It's like, I mean, I'm sure it's like that in some of the schools even now. You would get some discrimination, some, whether it's on the same grounds or not, I don't know. But I mean, that sort of drove me into doing something about it as well later on. And it was things we picked up. And then, as I say, the home life would be totally different. And then in the late 60s and early 70s, you had the Indian program starting up. So when grandmother was here, they would sit and watch some of the Indian programs and Network East and this and that. And so the home life was very much a family-oriented life, and outside was your friends and everything. And it was...
So, but on that day when you were sent home, and you said
yes,
before,
I did get into a lot of trouble. Yes.
Yeah. So before that, you said you didn't mention this at home, so they had no clue about that this was happening. So when this happened and you were sent back, and obviously you had to tell them.
Yes.
So what was their reaction then? Because this was something breaking news for them, right?
Yes. I mean, obviously, I was told off, and very much so. And it's not the way we do things, and you don't do this, you don't do that. Okay.
Did you tell them what has happened and why did you do it?
Yeah, I did tell my dad, and he did understand. And he just said, well, just don't fight, go and tell your teachers or whatever. And I said to him, it's not going to work. It doesn't work like that in this country. So that's the way we grew up until about 17. And say once we left school, I went to college, and that was a little bit better. And after I did electronics at college, and right at the end of the college, which was what they call, I'm trying to think of it now, BTEC in those days. I went to, once we left college at 17, so it's about 18, coming up towards 19, and that time they were used to have these job experience schemes and so on. There was a placement that came up with the university that I saw, and that was something that was a real interest to me. But it was, as I said to you, back in 1967 with the space project, it was a job with space radio physics. So that was under a professor called Michael Rycroft, and it was working with a PhD group there. And once I joined that became very interesting. They had actually done studies of the ionosphere, the aurora borealis, and I really did get involved there. And the faculty and the professor was very, very impressed with the work I did, that I actually joined their PhD group to help them in the field as well. So I spent about 3.5 months out in Norway as well with them. What had happened was they were trying to study the signal, communication signals that bounce around the Earth, magnetic flux. They ionize, the gas ionizers, you get the aurora borealis, but to measure signals bouncing between the poles is very difficult, and the instruments they needed to do it, they got the designs of it from America, but these instruments didn't exist at those times. So someone had designed them to measure these frequencies and stretch on the frequencies as it stretched out, because when it bounces from one pole to the other, the higher and the lower frequencies stretch, and you sort of get a whistler, they call it, and to measure the rates and so on. I actually did the design for the circuit boards, and the US Navy gave us 6 former ballistic missiles just to make the payloads for, to make our own measurements. To get a precise measurement, you need a base to work from, and we actually put barium into the missile, so we exploded barium in the ionosphere. So you could do it at a rate that you knew, the amount you knew, to get the right amount of signals and then monitor it. So I did the designs, as I say, for these things, and that actually got picked up with the Echo, and I had some articles in the Echo about it and so on back in 79. And it was interesting, so I got really into it, and I put my own time into it as well. And they were impressed by it, so I did very well there. And he then said, would you like to carry on and do the field work as well? And I see results. Yeah, of course I would. So I actually got a job there for an extended 6 months, and as I say, 3.5 months out in Norway as well. And that turned out to be quite good. I mean, a lot of the research work that the PhD graduates were doing was later used. I mean, it was sponsored by US Navy as well, so some of it was used in the military. Some of it's had civil applications. Any of these sort of stations where you have communications between sea stations, for underwater communications, a lot of that work is involved there. I mean, before we did this work, you had these Polaris nuclear submarines. They would have to come to the surface and put the mast up to communicate, and the satellite would then pick up the track, or the planes would pick up the track where these submarines were. It was very interesting because after we did this work with the VLF and found how it travels through water and how easy it is to communicate on VLF, the submarine just put a big long wire out the back, about a mile long, and they could pick up signals without ever surfacing, without ever doing anything. So there were practical applications that we saw that came from that as well. So that was very, very interesting. So that's where sort of my career started.
Well, before we move forward to your
Yeah.
career, we would like to come back to your college life, because you did mention about the trouble you had in school. Did you have to face anything similar in college, or was
No,
it all
college was very much different. College was, there was some banter and so on, but then you get that in any walk of life, playing around or whatever.
on the similar grounds?
No, nothing as much at all. I mean, there were a few idiots in those days, back in the 70s, where would call you the N-word or refer to you as a brown this or a black this or whatever. There's a few of them, but not as much. I mean, again, with the lecturers, even if they had their own views, they didn't put them across to us or anything like that.
So you could sense that they also have some views, the lecturers.
Some lecturers would have that type of view because they were all an older generation above, which had come through the war or whatever, and they were now teaching, and some of them did have that sort of what I would call empire attitude, and that still exists in a lot of places, and a place like the BBC, I would say, still exists.
What was it like for your father in his job and career? Did he face anything similar, or was it?
No, in jobs in the industry in those days, there was anything like that at all. And again, we didn't sit and discuss how he was doing at work or what he was doing at work. I knew where he works, and that was it. But there was no day-to-day thing of this was happening, that was happening. I mean, there was never any problems as far as I know. And he had friends, and they would meet up. He had friends come round as well at times.
So what,
English friends.
Yeah. So what factory your father started working in? Because you said his photography
Original
thing
factory he started was Wellworthy, and then he went to AC Delco's, and then he went to Pirelli's. That's the three he worked at.
And you said that in India you just picked up the basic English.
Yes.
So when you came to this country and you had to go to school, what was it like? How did you manage the language?
Very hard in terms of understanding or trying to speak fluently. Nowadays you wouldn't be able to tell, especially on a microphone, whether a person is English, not, whatever, because the language is there and the accent's there. I suppose I have a very strong sort of Hampshire accent, and but in those days, I mean, I knew sort of A to Z and counting and everything else and how to spell things, but then when you actually speak it, it's different. And very much, if you saw a local Indian station in India, this sometimes happens when we go to India, you see some of the local stations and they pronounce everything so differently because they're pronouncing it as you're seeing it. They don't know any of the idiosyncrasies and any of the other ways of pronouncing things, yeah. So it does become a bit funny because when you say this, I can't really think of any on the top of my head straight away. It's very hard. But some of the words, the pronunciations would be totally different and so on. So yeah, and literally it was like learning a new language while you were at luckily it was at a younger age, and you obviously pick up a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And then secondary school, you learn French as well. And je suis parlez-vous petit France.
So when did you go back to India after coming to UK? Like you came in 66?
66,
Yes. And so when did you go back for the first time?
First time we went back, or first time I went back. Mum went a couple of times in between.
Okay.
But the first time I went back was just before my 21st birthday.
Okay, and that was for?
I went with my grandmother because she was going, and it was my 21st birthday, and I just wanted to go to India after such a long time and catch up with her. I could still remember my cousins and the family and so on quite clearly, because you remember everything in India quite clearly because there's a cut-off. It's like sudden cut. If you sort of move and you were moving around, it's different. But when you suddenly get cut from one end and put into something else, that memory sticks with you. So yeah, I could remember my cousins my age, we used to play around and who we used to play with and everything. So when I went back, I actually made sure I went and visited all my uncles and everybody and reconnected. And obviously with my cousins, it's very, very good friends again and brothers, and we are all very close even now. So.
And was there a communication between you and your family in India when you were here in UK? How did that communication happen?
There was up till about the 80s or early 80s. You had air letters. I don't know if you've seen those at all or not. Basically, it's a very, very thin blue paper which would fold up and you just stick down, and that was about 1.5 pages of writing. And that was the only thing that you sent, because sending parcels or anything else would be very, very expensive. Whereas an air letter is maybe £1 or something, compared to the local stamps, which were like 10p or whatever that time. Even then it was a lot, but the air letters were the only way. So mum used to keep in touch with her brothers and her sister. My father didn't have any other real family up back in India. When my uncle came here, his young brother came here, my grandmother came here. There wasn't really, there was some extended family, but nothing that he had kept in touch with. And really, my mum's side of the family were my cousins were, which I knew as well. And literally grown up together. And then mum used to write very regularly in Hindi. So she would, there was an air letter and literally a monthly catch up of what's going on. And then you get one coming back.
So did you used to accompany her like in writing or like maybe posting the letters? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I used to go around to the post office and post them for her and things like that. Yeah, I mean, where we live in Portswood, the post box was just down the road sort of thing. But mum would have a supply, I think every Asian household had a supply of these letters, like a pack of 10 of them. You'd buy packs of 10, and that was the only real, because to make phone calls was very expensive. I mean, phone calls we sort of made at Diwali or Christmas or sort of New Year, something when you got a spare, or a birthday maybe, you might make a phone call. And in those days, the phone would cost you £2, £3, £4, which doesn't sound a lot, but when you're earning sort of £14 to £20 a week in those days, it's a lot of money, to spend £4 out of that on a phone call. It's like spending £50, £60 now, I suppose, in those times, because it was very limited in terms of communication, satellite communication those days. It's late 70s, the satellite communication came in, you got clearer lines. Before that, I can actually remember, you would say you would have to book a call. If you wanted to ring someone, you had their number, you would give it to the operator, and they said, all right, we'll ring you back. And they would ring you back, your call's booked for 7:30 tonight. And then they would ring you back at 7:30, because they would route the call through the cables, and each one had to plug it into their board or whatever. And that plan was sent out by the Telecom Authority, which later became BT. It was a post office at that time. They would then route that through, and you would have the operator ring you at 7. We're going to put you through now, and they would then put you through on the last bit.
So there was a phone in your household as well?
There was a phone call, a telephone in our house.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean
Yeah.
I can always remember having a phone line since we bought the house. That was one of the first things we did, get a phone line.
And was there a telephone in India as well, or?
Yes, we
Yeah.
had phones in India as
Okay.
well. Yes.
Okay.
My grandfather used to have one of these railway phones as well, because he was working in the railway. They would connect up to the railway lines, and you sort of turn the thing and power it up. But at home, there's a normal phone with a dial and everything else. Yes.
And what about television?
Television we didn't have until about, let me think, about 1970. So for the first few years there was no television. 67 I can remember sitting downstairs with Mr. Khan and his family and everybody else, and Dad and Mum sitting there watching the moon landing live on telly. It was black and white in those days, and actually watching it on telly, watching Neil Armstrong come down the lunar module and everything, and that's what gave me sort of interest in aviation, space and everything else. So yeah, initially I wanted to be a pilot, but that was just an ambition, and it never came through. I joined the cadets when I was 12, and I did at 17 try to join the RAF, and the board there said they would give me, they have a board and you apply for your jobs and you put your preferences down, and according to your qualifications and everything. Obviously I wanted to be a pilot or a flying job. They didn't offer me any of those. The only thing they offered me was ground radar engineer. So you would spend 4 years training and then 8 years on the job, so 12-year sort of RAF career. But I declined that because I didn't want to join ground radar for 12 years and sign up for 12 years. It wasn't of my interest at the time. Although I went into something very similar with space radio physics, as I say, that was communications as well. So, yeah.
Tell me about the food culture in Southampton when you arrived for the first time.
When we first arrived here, literally...
Were there enough grocery shops and Indian food available around?
Yeah. Most of it, I say, came from Southall. And, you would buy bags or whatever you wanted in Southall, larger wholesale bags. I mean, bag of flour, bag of rice, bag of dals or whatever. And the local shops had it, but it was obviously a lot dearer. And then if you wanted something in particular, or you wanted fresh vegetables for starters, then the local shop would have it. There were 2 or 3. Let's say there was a couple of Muslim shops. There was Bashir Ahmed's and the International Suresh, and then you had Hanan Singh, and then later on in the 70s you had Ram stores as well, Banga stores. They came along, and then a little bit later than that, then his brother opened. And then several others, Global and International and so on. A few others came along, but right at the beginning there was just those 3 shops, really 3 that I can remember. That literally, if you wanted something like a vegetable or something, and they would go regularly twice a week to London and go and pick it up, bring it back, or once a week or twice a week.
And you had your own kebab place, but what about the other places to eat in Southampton at that point?
At that point, there were very few. I can't remember going out to many places to eat. We would have friends around and we would meet up, and Mum would do cooking and then friends would do, you go to each other's houses and stuff a lot. We had parties and stuff and garden parties. I mean, that sort of thing was there, and it was all made at home. I mean, my grandmother was here and she would, sit down, okay, we're going to make some matia today, or we're going to do some samosas today or whatever, and they would make it. Things were fresh and that was it. And if it was something like samosas, they would have to be made fresh. There's very little you could freeze in those days. You didn't buy any ready-made. There weren't no ready-made sauces. It's only when you come into the later in the 70s or early 70s that people started doing things like samosas and so on from home. and selling them and supplying them to shops, and that's when it first sort of came around. The first guy I really remember making a business of it, I'm trying to think of his name and I can't really remember it, because he supplied our shop as well. It's a Gujarati guy. They'd come from Uganda, and when they settled in Southampton, he did a samosas thing. He literally did it from his garage and converted everything, and he was supplying all the shops around. He'd come round in the morning with his trays with the samosas. But before that, actually going out was very, very difficult. There was not a lot in terms of restaurants and stuff in Southampton. There may have been, I'm trying to think when we can first remember, because it was sort of 70s again, sort of mid-70s, when shops started opening up, little restaurants, and that was mainly the Bangladeshi community when they moved in and started opening up the restaurants and so on. I remember when Kutimia came to Southampton, I can remember, I think 71, something like that. No, 70, 76 maybe. I can't. It's between. It's the very early 70s, and I can remember him meeting Dad and becoming friends, and then he opened up a shop on London Road, and that was one of the bigger places that came in. Before that, it was like little tiny restaurants to the seating capacity about 20, 30 that had opened up. Up till that time, really, there wasn't really many places you could go out. And being vegetarian with Mum and my grandmother and my father, it tended to be a drive up to Southall, and then you had down by what was the old Dominion Cinema, you had Sagutaka and a few other popular places, known names, which are doing Punjabi food or proper home type Indian food.
So now that you have mentioned cinema, what was that like in early days? Did you get to see movies in theatres?
Early days, we asked them to put movies on. I can remember Dad doing it with the community to put movies on, and it was the old ABC cinema in below bar, above bar. Is it? No, below bar. Where if you go with opposite Marlins, you've got Burger King right opposite Marlins. That about that point there used to be the ABC cinema, and that used to put on Indian films every weekend.
So you remember watching any movies there?
Yeah, I remember watching. That's when I first sort of introduced to any Indian movies. Before that, there was no way really to see them except to go to London and see it. London had a much, much larger community, obviously, and there was more things going on. And when the ABC started doing these, I mean, the first to start with, the halls were packed, and then they started putting on different films as well. I remember them trying to diversify, because everybody was saying, we want ours, and then there was an Indian film one week, and then you would have a Pakistani film, and then there was West Indian type film, a Nigerian film, I think, Nigerian community here. There were 2 or 3 different types of films that went on, but it was like once a week or 1 week every month. I can't honestly remember that there would be a film.
Any particular movie which you remember watching?
Ab tera kya hoga Kaliya.
Oh, that's a good old Sholay.
Yes. Sholay.
So was that in the year 1975? Because that's when Sholay released.
Yeah.
So were the movies released straight away, or they used to come later then?
It's around that time I saw it. It was it would have been about 76 when I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
very, very similar. Yeah.
And how was the, feel like everybody watching Sholay on big screen? You remember that?
On the big screen, yeah. As kids, it was a day out and it was something to do, something different. It wasn't really something we didn't know we were going to enjoy it or not. Then when we saw it, okay, something different. We could laugh at them as well. But that's when the first Indian films came, and then the Odeon started doing them, and then Ocean Village started doing them, and it sort of spread from there. But That's when the first one started, yeah.
What was the modes of transport like back then? How did you used to travel to school or college? Or your father used to travel?
Right. Dad, when he first came, he had a bike, push bike, and would go on the push bike, and anywhere else we wanted to go, we went by bus. And when my sister was born, that's the one after me, I'm trying to think of the gap between us, it's about a 7-year gap. So 72, I think something like 72, we bought our first car, 72, 73, a Hillman Minx. I can remember it.
And the color as well?
Baby blue. Blue, light blue, sort of baby blue. That's one of the main colours they came in. So when Angela came home from the hospital, Dad picked her up in the car and brought her home. And that was our first car. Yeah, I can remember that.
Do you remember the first car which you drove?
The first car I drove was obviously driving school, but I actually started driving or learning beforehand, and with the cadets we had driven Land Rovers and a few other bits and pieces around off-road. But so you had the sort of fundamentals of it, and I passed my test at 17 straight away. And the first car I actually owned was a Morris 1300. So that was a real old, like a granny's car, really. But they were quite powerful, and I think there's something like a 1.6 or 1.8 engine on them, but they were quite powerful.
So, about your experiences in Southampton, you came at a very early age. What is the best memory you can think of?
Southampton?
Yes.
Well, growing up school's just part of it. That was just one part of it. But growing up in Southampton, Southampton was a nice place. Lots of parks, common. Used to be a boating lake down by the sports centre. They used to have a big lake in there. And literally, once we were sort of 11, 12, we had bikes. We could bike around anywhere we wanted. It was, our street, we had, when we first moved there and Dad got the car, there was only like 2, maybe 3 cars in the whole street. And even with the phone, sometimes, neighbours would knock, "Can we use your phone, please?" It was something not everybody had, but there was quite a few phones around, obviously. But when the cars, there was only like 2 or 3 cars in the whole street, and it was very quiet. So the kids would play outside, we would play football outside, play on the roads, lots of areas to go around, cycling anywhere you like, up to the common, all over the place, anywhere. Sort of started to find out places further than Portswood where things were by just cycling and going around all day, and sometimes.
Okay, let's go back and talk about the ladies of the house now. We have talked about you and your dad.
Yeah.
What was your mother's and grandmother's life like in UK?
Grandmother came here, and she was mostly helping with the childminding and bringing up the kids, because Mum used to work part-time at the bakery, so she would go to the bakery in the evening, I think something like 4 o'clock or something, and then come back 10 o'clock at night.
And was she working in India as well, or did she start it
No,
here?
she started working here because you literally had to be able to afford things as things got more and more dearer. And obviously, with just the one household income, things were getting dearer. So Mum was working part-time, but in the evenings. And I think that was the case with a lot of the community. The bakery was a big employer. There was a lot of Asians working there, both what used to be what Mr. Kipling's, I think is called, and the sort of cakes group, and the other side, the sort of Mother's Pride, which was the big bakery with the bread and so on. So I worked down at the bakery a couple of times when I was at college, because during the holidays you would go. I didn't need to sit around. I had to do something all the time. So when we were at college, we wanted a little bit of money to save up. We'd go and work down the bakery with the agency. That would be good money. They would just call you in when they wanted. And obviously, a lot of the ladies did work down there. that was the main. I'm trying to think of the main employers. There was that, and there was British American Tobacco, and trying to think with the other ladies sort of. There were. There was a place down towards Titchfield that some of them used to go to. I'm trying to think of the name of it, and I can't remember. But there's 2 or 3 factories where there were jobs for the ladies. Sort of,
And how did she used to travel to work?
It started off with Dad dropping her, but then people who went there were arranging. There was a lot of people, a lot of the Asian community worked for Ford as well, and they started running vans. You would get a passenger type van, transit van, and there wasn't one. You'd see like 6, 7 different vans. People doing that as a sideline in the evenings to drop the ladies and pick them up, and it's like communal transport. They would pay for their weekly thing. They get picked up in Portswood, so she'd walk out to the main road and they get picked up there.
So there were other ladies also from the local community going
from the
along
local
with
community, or from further down towards Derby Road, that side.
Hmm.
Where we were, there were very few Asian families. There was maybe 3 or 4 at that time. When you talk about Derby Road, Cavelli Road, Northumberland Road, that side, a lot of the community initially came there because the housing was cheaper there, and that tends to be in most countries, most cities. When you get immigrants coming into a city, they tend to go to the cheaper side of the housing and everything until they can afford it. And then you see this happening. I mean, I've seen it happening in Southampton so much. I mean, I can remember when we used to go down Argyle Road and Derby Road to the shops, there would still be places along the shops, places along the road there in Derby Road, saying like a guest house, and they would have boards outside saying, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, and that was legal. There was nothing against it.
This is in which year you're talking about?
Derby Road.
Year, I'm asking.
Oh, which year?
Which year would that be?
Probably about 68, 69.
Okay.
Yeah, up till 70s, as far as I can remember, because Derby Road also used to be a red light area at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And we were kids, but, obviously you start finding out these things, and by the time you're 11, 12, you do know what's going on, obviously, and there would be a window with a red light, curtains drawn, but there would be a doll in there standing up. If the lady's available, there's a doll lying down in the window. If she's not available, you pick these things up from giggling around and the kids talking about it.
So, to ask you another question, that do you remember any particular person who might have helped you in your early days of settlement in Southampton? Any?
Yeah, as I said, there was Dad's good friend, Mr. Shemshad Khan, where we first stayed. There were several other people. I mean, once the community sort of got together, by the 70s, there was a few of us that would meet each other. I mean, there was Mr. Sharma, which was Benny Sharma and son, the family, and Mr. Das, this Dr. Sunak's dad. There's a few other places, and some of the families were quite close to us. So we were quite close to Mr. Das. He came from Kenya, and we'd literally become like family. And Mr. Malhotra, that was next to him, and Mr. Pandey. These families were all together, and they would be going to each other's houses. But I grew up with Dr. Sunak and his brothers at that time, and it was literally like a family. I mean, when my son was born, Vijay, I mean, Rishi's a little bit older than him, but we would be at each other's houses. I mean, I can remember Rishi coming home from the hospital with Usha and everything. It was just a normal family, and that was it. And Sanjay and Raki, and
Yes.
so it wasn't anything in those days. Just the kids, and my kids went to Balavika classes, same as they did. We took them to Hindi classes. We'd drive them down sometimes. Kavita's kid, Karan was like that. He's there as well. So yeah, it was just a family atmosphere where we would know these particular groups that were together,
So
growing up.
got few more questions for you now. Might
Yeah.
be tricky ones, but tricky in the sense because in the big span of life, it's sometimes difficult to pick a moment.
Yeah.
But if I do ask you to pick a moment which was happiest for you since you arrived in Southampton, would you be able to do that? Any particular memory which is very special to you?
Very special to me. Birth of my first son, I suppose. First
That's
baby,
lovely.
and that's the first one, and then now the birth of my first grandson. So
Okay.
those are the two that stand out, I think.
And how do you feel Southampton has changed over time? Because you have spent a good amount of time in
Southampton has
city.
expanded a lot
Yeah.
from the time we came to Southampton. It was very much smaller. I can see all the suburbs that have expanded out, and there used to be green fields between Eastleigh and Southampton. It's all merged together. Towards the other side, towards Titchfield, everything. Every little village used to be a separate village. It's all merged all along the coast, and the city itself has changed so much. You know, within the centre of the city, the roads themselves have changed so much. Pedestrianised area where cars used to go through before. The buildings have changed. Obviously, been knocked down. New ones being put up. Places like Devon used to be Edwin Jones, and you had Terrell and Greens, and all these other plumbers, which is now university, and there's so many different places that have changed. Now, I've got some photos of that. I mean, the Civic used to have a rose garden right in front of it with a big fountain. It used to look quite dramatic, with the traffic going around it. And that was all removed to make room for Marlins. Where Marlins is, that used to be a bus station. And the green buses, the ones that go, county buses, they used to call them, would go up to Winchester and so on. You had city buses and you had county buses. And that was a county bus. And the green buses would go into that little area and stop, and you would have buses going to Portsmouth, Titchfield, Bournemouth, sort of up to Winchester. So that was the main bus station there. When they made that into a shopping centre, they encroached on a lot of that land. And the fountain itself was put outside the library, so that's a big fountain there. That used to be in the front.
Now, another one is that if you could speak to yourself arriving back then, like when you arrived in UK, what piece of advice would you give to yourself?
Myself, it's what I've given to my kids, is to study. I think, and make sure they've got an environment where they could study. I mean, we've been very lucky, as I say, within most of the families that I know. Everybody knows about Rishi, obviously, and my elder son, he's into IT as well. He's working for a particular bank. I don't know if you want me to say the name of it or not, but he is in banking. He works for them, and my younger son, he works for an AI company, artificial intelligence. He finished his PhD about 2-3 years ago in particle physics. He also did particle physics, and he has a PhD. So the kids are both all done very well. I mean, and within our sort of families that I know, I mean, even Rishi's brother Sanjay is a surgeon. He's a psychologist. Sorry, my brother's daughter, she's becoming a psychologist. They're all doing fairly well.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing, I think, study, because that's the one thing I think a lot of the Ugandan nations found as well, because when things turn, or even now you see with the war going on, in Ukraine, one thing that's still in demand is people who are educated. If you're a doctor, you can work as a doctor in America, here, wherever. IT is in demand, is the main thing at the moment. So whatever you're doing, that's what I would try and say to myself. Concentrate a bit more on that, and you might do a little bit better.
So would you say that this will be your message to the future generation as well?
I think so. I mean, I think one of the things as a nation value is study and stability. The first thing we sort of think of is not going on a dashing holiday, but to put enough down for a deposit, to get ourselves somewhere to live and to be stable. And it tends to be. I know things have changed a lot now. A lot of the younger generation are driving around in Ferraris and sunning off and whatever because their parents have made the money or whatever. I mean, the number of millionaires in Southampton within the Asian community, you would be surprised. People who look like a normal family have normal people you meet every day, maybe in a temple or something. But you don't know. They may have 40 houses, 50 houses, big landlords. They may have running businesses which are exporting, pharmaceutical businesses. These are people that I know personally. I mean, they are all multimillionaires, but you wouldn't know to look at them.
So that would my last question would be that how do you feel about Southampton now it is where you live, and what message would you like to give to people who would like to come and live here?
Southampton's a very nice and very pleasant city to live in up till now. The traffic is changing a little bit, and I think the planning departments in our city are not working for the people anymore. They're working more for it's very hard to say things because I'm a driver and I know driving's a no-no nowadays. But you've got to have transport, whether there's electric cars or whatever cars. And when you have road schemes, they spend like £10 million doing a bicycle lanes here and there and everywhere, narrowing the streets down, and they think it's green. I don't know where they're coming from. It doesn't make sense to me. Financially, it's coming back to the old thing. Yeah, they're spending the city's money, but are they getting the best value for it? No, they're just putting our rates up and so on. So it's become very political in that sense. I think there are areas of the city which are very poor and run down, which need a lot of investment. And I think some of that money they play around with these things could be better invested in Southampton itself, to give better housing, to give better jobs, to give more jobs, more industrial areas, rather than coming up with schemes and where can we spend and what grant we can apply for next to the government to make another £1 million worth here or whatever. I mean, I think that money could be much, much better spent by the politicians, really, if they listen. But that's the only message it is. It's becoming like a lot of other cities that have done that. But some have become very successful because they have invested and they've done the right thing. And Southampton, in that sort of sense, has gone down a bit. The cruise ships save it. I mean, there's a big port there, and the port has done very well, and it's always made a profit. And the Ports Authority in Southampton are one of the biggest companies, and in my own personal opinion, some of the biggest crooks as well. They make the money, but it's not all reinvested here. And they've done a lot of things in places like Ocean Village, which became a big maritime centre at one time with world races and shops and everything. And they decided to cash in on the flats and get rid of everything and just make flats because they knew they could make more money. That's all the Docks Board and the Docks Authority and where they've made the terminals. Okay, they've gone to make the money or whatever, yes, okay. But City Council's planning should be a lot better and it should be a much more pleasant. It is quite a green town. You've got parks all the way through the town, right up to the top. It's a pleasant city to live in. Most things are available locally, amenable. Very good links straight out. You've got the motorway fairly close up. The railway lines running along the coast and north, and obviously to London. Yeah, it's a nice place to live and work if you can find the right jobs and the right. I mean, a lot of companies have moved in. A lot of IT businesses come up and retail parks have come up. But I think there's a lot of mismanagement on the City Council's part to try and get things right and moving in the right direction. I think at one time I can remember council moving and trying to twin with China and doing a lot. If they'd spent that money here, just twinning with themselves here and putting the effort in, they would have done a lot better than any contracts they've got from that.
And what would you like to say about the cultural diversity of the city?
the city has a very, very rich cultural diversity, especially within the last 10 years when you've had people from all around the world move in. I mean, as I was saying to you about the immigrant areas, originally you had the Asian community, the Sikh and Pakistani community, then you had the Somali community, and then the Afghan community, and they've all come and gone through that area because things were cheap to live in that area. We have a very, very diverse lot of communities, and I've done a lot of community work in Southampton. So, yeah, I mean, we all get together and we do get along with everybody. And within the people that I know anyway, I mean, I can walk anywhere and I know I would be welcome, whether it's the Jewish community or the Muslim community, or whether it's our own temple, or the sort of Afghans or whatever. Wherever I go, I think everything has gone well. I mean, I don't know what the younger generation is going to be like, obviously, and how much competition there is and everything. But up till now, things within Southampton have remained very, very good. And I think people want to keep it that way because it's pleasant to live in and it's a nice environment to live in. So.
Well, thank you so much, Vinodji, for your time here. And it was lovely and a pleasant experience listening to your journey in Southampton. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.
There you go. So this is me, Divya, recording for the